One of the most often asked questions with regard to modeling is, where do I start? And this is something that I actually wrestled with for a long time, because I always wanted to be sure that I started in the right place, because I was interested in developing the correct model. And so a blank page was actually my worst enemy, because the blank page detracted from my ability to start, and because I started, I couldn't get past the blank page, so I was caught in a vicious reinforcing loop. Though, as it turns out, it really doesn't make any difference where you start. You could actually start with any element on this map and ask about what is it that it influences and what influences it. And you would evolve to a relevant map. Though typically what we recommend is that you map those elements and relationships which are relevant to the situation that you're trying to understand. Now, you probably noticed that I use the term relationship map and model interchangeably. Model is a much easier word to say than relationship map, and far easier than network of relationships. They all mean essentially the same thing. And my preferred definition for model is: a model is a simplification of reality intended to promote understanding. And to the extent that a model accomplishes that, it's a good model. If the model doesn't actually promote understanding, then it's not very good and ought to be worked on or replaced with some better model. So if you start with the situation that you're trying to understand, and in this case, the situation was, I have a project for which there is a deadline and an expected completion date which is later than the deadline, so I have a schedule gap, and that's what it is that I'm trying to figure out how to deal with. The the guidance is that we develop models around situations as opposed to modeling systems, because if you start with the situation that you're trying to understand, it's easier to determine what's relevant to that situation. Whereas if you're simply modeling a system, how do you ever figure out when to stop, because everything's connected? Additionally, I said you could start any place and come up with essentially the same model. Though once you do finally develop the model that you consider to be all of the relevant relationships to help understand the situation and give you a basis for figuring out how to deal with it, it's best if you figure out how to unfold that model as a story, because the model actually tells a story. So if you take and you can unfold the same model in different ways. It's a question of how is it how is one unfolding better than another in terms of conveying meaning, because seldom do you end up developing a model alone. More often than not, whatever understanding the model is intended to convey, the insights about it, you will want to connect other individuals with the understanding that that model surfaces. And we find, or it's been repeatedly shown, that we understand stories better than anything else because of the way that they all hang together and the meaning associated with them. So that rather than simply giving someone this diagram, if it's unfolded in a meaningful manner as a story, it is far easier to understand. And as I said, the intent of a model is to promote understanding. So if I take this same model and unfold it in this manner, as just a model that was created previously, I start with a deadline and the expected completion date, which creates a gap, and that gap promotes overtime, which influences labor quantity, and I have what's called a balancing loop because it's trying to balance the difference between the deadline and the expected completion date. And very shortly in another video, we'll talk about balancing loops and reinforcing loops. So don't let them throw you off at the moment. So this is the first part of the story. The second part of the story is, well, with that initial undertaking, the overtime is likely to lead to fatigue and produce decreases in labor productivity, which extends the completion date. So we end up with what's called a fatigue delay reinforcing loop, which is not advantageous to us. It's not moving us in a direction that we want to go. And as the next component of this environment, we could take this schedule and add resources, which adds to the labor quantity, which should bring in the expected completion date and close the schedule gap. So we have another balancing loop, which is moving us in a direction that we do want to go. Though at the same time, we understand that adding resources initially tends to reduce the labor productivity, which would then move the date out, increasing the schedule gap. And we have a reinforcing cycle that delays project completion. So this is the same model. It's just unfolded as a story. And it's easier to convey the meaning of the model when you unfold it as a story. And in a future course, I'll actually talk about how to build, how to do storytelling in Insight Maker and Kumu. Both of them are very adept at doing. I mean, you have watched me essentially unfold stories in Insight Maker from the very beginning of this course. So hope you have found this informative, and I'll see you in the next video. We'll talk about balancing and reinforcing loops. Take care. Bye.